Man in Gray here with another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is Can War Be Eliminated by Christopher Coker, published in 2014 by Polity Press. It's 122 pages long. Christopher Coker is a lecturer, professor at the London School of Economics. And in this book, he examines the history of warfare, its evolution, and its future prospects. And the short answer to the title question is no. War cannot be eliminated. At least Coker says it probably can't be. And that's for a number of reasons. For one thing, he describes warfare as being like a virus within human culture. It not only self-replicates, but it also evolves over time. Warfare has been found in every human culture going back to ancient times. In fact, the oldest major work of literature in the West is Homer's The Iliad, which is a war story. And of course, many of the ancient or medieval texts that we have from Europe and other countries glorify war. The Beowulf, the Icelandic sagas, the Bhagavad Gita in India talks about how noble it is to fight a war. So what is it about war? Why is war so popular? Well, one of the obvious reasons, as Coker says, is that the winning side benefits enormously from warfare. You gain territory, you gain property, slaves in the old days, economic growth. The United States, for example, benefited enormously from World War II. Despite the casualties that they took, the economy expanded enormously during the war and afterwards. For years, the United States dominated global economics because they were the only major player in the war whose infrastructure was not heavily damaged by the war. And so that left the United States in the ideal position to dominate world trade for years, decades after the war. It took many years for Europe and Asia to catch up to the United States. And so that's an obvious advantage. Another advantage of warfare is that if you are an oppressed group, it gives you an opportunity to throw off the shackles of oppression. Another advantage is warfare unites a community around a common enemy. And sometimes you don't even need a war to do that. You can have the threat of war. Perfect example of that is Yugoslavia during the Cold War. Yugoslavia was composed up mainly of two big ethnic groups, the Serbs and the Croats. Serbs being Christian, Croats being Muslim, and they were traditional enemies going back hundreds of years. But after World War II, when the communist government was set up in Yugoslavia, the Communist Party hammered into everybody's heads that the big enemy was the United States and the West, that they were constantly threatening to overtake and overturn the government of Yugoslavia. And so the Croats and the Serbs, for decades, put aside their differences against the common enemy of the West. But when the Soviet Union collapsed and communism fell in the early 1990s, there was no longer a common threat. And so the Serbs and the Croats soon broke apart. Yugoslavia broke apart into separate countries, and very quickly they went to fight against each other in a real series of bloody wars. And so the threat of war maintained peace within Yugoslavia. But when the threat went away, real, smaller scale, but very bloody wars broke out within the former Yugoslavia. So there are some advantages to war, and there's also some disadvantages to peace. As he points out in his book, there's a common saying, common cliche, there's never been a good war or a bad peace, but as he points out in here, there are bad peaces. Because one of the things that peace does is it freezes injustice in place. A good example of that, again, from the United States, was the first half of the 19th century, where there were a number of political compromises to try to prevent a civil war over the issue of slavery. And of course, that worked up until 1860. So for 60 years in the 19th century, we avoided war, but the price that was paid for that peace was that millions of black Americans remained slaves. They were locked into slavery. And there's because the South was the Southern economy is so carefully intertwined with slavery, it seems very unlikely that the South would have ever given up slavery voluntarily. And so a war had to have been fought to end slavery. And of course, it wound up being a long and very bloody war. But the end of the war meant the end of slavery. Of course, that didn't mean the end of oppression against black Americans, but at least it ended their treatment as property. So The other point that Coker makes in this is that war is not static. It evolves with time. And now, even though this book was published 10 years ago, it still remains relevant and in many ways very prescient, particularly the chapter about technology, because in this book he's talking about how war has now evolved to being more and more technology based, where the future of war will be fought by drones, robots, and cyber attacks. And of course, we've seen that come true most recently. And a few weeks ago, from the time I'm videoing this, we had an attack by Iran against Israel, but the attack was made up entirely of drones and missile strikes with no actual boots on the ground. And Israel and the United States responded with anti-ballistic missiles and fighter jet attacks on the drones, but again, no boots on the ground. So this was a battle that was fought entirely by technology: drones, missiles, and missiles fired from planes, but no actual physical troops fighting with each other. And there's also been, of course, various cyber attacks on various countries that we've seen. Here in the United States has been attacked, has suffered a number of cyber attacks, probably originating from North Korea and China and Russia. So the book predicted that. And of course, the movement of warfare away from mass armies to smaller groups of soldiers and technologically based fighting makes it more likely that war will continue instead of less likely. So, altogether, I think this is a very interesting book, very thought provoking. And again, even though it was published 10 years ago, I think it still remains very relevant. He doesn't, the conclusion's not really a despair. He doesn't say, well, it's hopeless, we're all going to have war, and World War III is inevitable. He doesn't say that. In fact, he says that World War III is actually probably less likely now because of the technological advances we have. What we do have to worry about are increasingly violent regional warfares. Okay? And so anyway, I think it's a book that's certainly worth reading. The book is Can War Be Eliminated? The author is Christopher Coker. This has been another Man in Gray Book Review. Thanks for watching.